Be advised that proper notice has been given by the Township Council in accordance with the Sunshine Law in the following manner. Notice advertised in the Burlington County Times and Camden Courier Post on January 16, 2018, and posted on the bulletin board on the same date. Ms. Correa?
Here.
Mr. Burrell?
Here.
Mrs. Politi?
Here.
Mr. O'Connell?
Here.
Mr. Ketchum?
Here. So we have a couple of items on the action agenda, and the first of which is Resolution 2018-196. This is the refunding of a tax overpayment due to a totally disabled veteran exemption on Block 120.01, Lot 9.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Ms. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Burrell?
Aye.
Mrs. Politi?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connell?
Aye.
Mr. Ketchum?
I'm actually going to abstain, as the mortgage company is a company that is one of our clients for my other job. Next, we have Resolution 2018-197. This is the refunding of a construction permit in the amount of $303. The permit number is 20170216.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Burrell?
Aye.
Mrs. Politi?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connell?
Aye.
Mr. Ketchum?
Aye. Next is Resolution 2018-198, and this is a resolution authorizing the release of police outside employment escrow to Tenby Chase Swim Club in the amount of $340.
So moved.
Second.
Dan, maybe you don't want to do that.
Oh,
You're a
yeah,
member
I'm
of
sorry, I
that
take
club.
that back. I'm a member of the
Okay.
pool.
So I need a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Burrell?
Aye.
Mrs. Politi?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connell?
Abstain.
Mr. Ketchum?
I'm going to say yes. I no longer am a member of the pool, and I have relinquished my bond. So next is Resolution 2018-199. This is a resolution approving raffle license number 554 for the Delanco Youth Sports Association.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Ms. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Burrell?
Aye.
Mrs. Politi?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connell?
Aye.
Mr. Ketchum?
Aye. Next, we have motions. I need a motion granting a mercantile license to Pine Estate, 150-11 Carriage Lane.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Correa?
Aye.
Mr. Burrell?
Aye.
Mrs. Politi?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connell?
Aye.
Mr. Ketchum?
Aye. All right, so our agenda includes some engineering services, the first of which being the Fairview Boulevard Island removal for the purpose of traffic calming and the like. And this is on the agenda. We have Jim here in case we have any questions. I believe this is a matter that what we have included in the capital.
You've already done the bond ordinance, you've had second reading on it, so all you need to do is authorize the engineer to move forward. He's giving you an engineering estimate. Engineering estimates within the estimates that we put in for the bond for professional services.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Is there, I mean, we've gone through this amazing. You have a question, Jim?
No, I just want to bring up, last time this was discussed, you asked me to go to DOT to make sure whether or not we get
Right.
a permit. And they went through their files and we convinced them that it's kind of outside their jurisdiction, so that we don't need to go to DOT for a
I
permit.
just wanted to justify why you were talking about that.
I just wanted to update you, because some of you may remember that was a lingering issue from last time this was brought up. So we were able to get that DOT resolved.
We do. Anybody else have any questions?
When do you think it will be done?
Well, if we're authorized tonight, I would hopefully, we'll shoot for the spring. There is a utility pole in the way, we have to move that. But other than that, it's, we should be ready to for spring construction, advertise this winter.
Great. Great, that's wonderful.
Good.
Except for we'll have a resolution for the public meeting. This is the work session.
Oh, okay.
So you can try that, that'll be a big thing.
What is that? That's
Yeah.
next Tuesday. It's
Next
the
Wednesday.
next,
Not next
No,
week.
Not next week.
Yeah.
November
Wednesday,
7th.
the 7th, yes.
You made Tom Morris day.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hope he's watching.
Morrow Island.
Okay, so we'll put that on the agenda for the public meeting. Next, we have the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over grant.
And yeah, the other one.
No.
Did I miss one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Oh, my bad. Next, we have our the sewer capital items, and this one, I don't believe we've done the bond ordinance for.
We
We've
have.
done it?
You have.
We have.
We've
Okay.
had second reading and public hearing, and we're just looking for the approval on the resolution and the fees and the professional fees are in the ordinance, and we would be looking to go to the NJEIT on this.
Yes, yeah. This is to replace the blowers at the aeration tanks, to be modernized, to have less energy consumption, and also to fix the water reclamation system so you can use plant effluent for the processing systems rather than taking public water and what they're doing right now.
And that was all in our 5-year plan.
5-year plan, we did a study on it to make sure it was gonna work and, so you realize cost savings and everything. Yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask too. You know, I remember you showing us that whole plan. How are we doing on that plan?
You're consistent with it.
We are.
Mhm.
Okay.
Good. So what do we need to do
I can
here?
give you,
Again, it would be, if everybody is in agreement, we would have it on the public meeting as a resolution to approve the engineering moving forward.
Great. Okay. Everybody in agreement? Anybody have an issue? We're good. All right, now we can drive sober or get pulled over. Jeff, this is all you.
Yeah, this is, the state provides these grants and they provide $55 an hour. We bring them to you so that you can authorize us to move forward because the $55 an hour for overtime does not cover the police. So if we were to have the highest paid police officer assigned to it, and it's a revolving overtime sheet, so we just estimated on the highest, that's the worst case scenario. It would be $81.70, which means in order to participate in 100 hours of law enforcement for this grant, the township's exposure could be at the most $2,670. So the council has pretty much routinely approved these, but at the same time, you've asked to see them so that everybody's aware of what our commitment is. If everybody's good with it, then we'll put it for the hearing.
Yeah, I think in the past we've said it's a bargain to get the officers out with using the grant. So everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Next, we have a sewer adjustment, and there's some interesting caveats to it. But Jeff, you want to?
First of all, it was received October 1st. This is way late. The way the regulations read in the sewer is that they have 30 days after the sewer bills are out, or the deadline is due, in order to request or appeal their sewer charges. So number one, it starts off that it's 3 or 4 months late. Secondly, I provided the information, or did I?
I didn't see the backup.
All right, the backup was basically cell phone texts saying, can you come over and fix this? There are no receipts. There's nothing along those lines, except for a cell phone. They are cell phone texts that look to be dated, the time frame that the person indicated. They had leaks with respect to their kitchen faucet, the toilet, and a leaky hose faucet. So the kitchen faucet and the leaky toilet would have been water that was processed at the sewer plant. The leaky hose faucet, no. When we look back at previous bills, the billing that they're requesting the adjustment on, it was $357 per quarter. It was a lot of water. The previous bill was $292 a quarter, which is again a lot of water. And the quarter before that, the year before that, was $240 to $2 per quarter. So they haven't been a small user of water. They've either had other leaks that they're not finding, or had them for a number of years, or something along those lines. So I don't know if you want to waive the late charge, first of all, and if you do, I don't think that I'd waive it any lower than last year's rate of $292, because they've been a significant user of water and processing in our plant.
You just ask our attorney, because my law background is just Judge Judy and those in her ilk. Text messages that are dated, are they acceptable evidence of, in court?
In the court of law, it depends on what kind of hearsay challenges can be brought in, but we're not in the court of law. So whether or not the council wants to consider those in concluding the decision is a policy decision and is not bound by the laws of evidence, the rules of evidence.
Okay.
So whatever's done is really setting precedents.
Well, I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?
As far as whatever, if they use the text messages as a valid means, then basically we're opening ourselves up to that's what we use from other people as well. So, in other words, it's basically across the board. Once you do it, you're going to be doing it for everybody.
No pun intended, to open up the floodgates, right? Well, that, again, council can address it on a case-by-case basis. There were other circumstances identified here by Jeff, which, you know, can almost like limit the veracity of how accurate the phone bill is. I mean, we have previous billings in terms of the other quarters that kind of can give you an average out. But again, that is something that a potential person could say, you guys have relied on this before, why can't we rely on the same evidence again?
Well, that's all I'm saying. I'm just bringing
That's
that up.
something that should, and might need to be taken into consideration.
But if we just go back to the 292, we can just even, that's not based basically on the text messages, correct?
Well,
I mean,
it's-
it is, but,
No, it's
no, it's really,
no, the text messages are all about, to a friend, can you come out? And
It's
that's my
fixed.
mailing, can you come out? And the friend revolves responding back, yes, I
That's what I'm
can.
getting at. That's what I'm getting at.
Right.
so if we go to the 292.
With little dates under them
Yeah.
that coincide with when she said the problem, so.
Yeah. But you're saying that if we go to the 292.75, it's kind of in the middle,
Well,
or?
That's what
I
the
sure,
previous bill-
I don't
bill.
know if I would I don't know if I'd entertain things that are 3 months late, but if you were doing it, I mean, given the past history of this user, the rates, the consumption has never been low, it's always been significant. I mean, minimum bills, 102.75. I mean, this is like 3 times the rate, and it's almost 3 times the rate even the year previous.
Refresh my memory, have we made adjustments on these when they've been this far over the deadline?
Not this far. We have made some when they've been slightly late, or if there seem to be some set of circumstances that maybe why they wouldn't have
Right,
discovered
right.
the issue.
And there's no reason, they didn't give a reason why they're so late?
I don't think so. No.
No?
No.
So, is that about this?
Yeah, it's some of the back of it.
I mean, we're
Yeah,
looking
and
at,
basically the response is I didn't think it would end up costing that much to have the leaks.
I mean, it's an adjustment of just under $65. It's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, but the fact is, they're past the deadline and they're relying on text of pictures. Am I getting this right? They're just saying, they're showing a picture of a leak? Is that what it is?
No, they're showing a picture of a text message asking a friend to come over and fix the leak. You know, the screenshot.
It's a,
Have it?
yeah.
Exhibit A.
That's, I mean, you know, with other folks, we've had receipts that work was done. I don't know that a text is showing me much of anything.
To state otherwise, the evidence is circumstantial, no direct evidence of the leak, at least based on what's been presented in front of me.
Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate that.
And they didn't offer any evidence from the friend or the friend other than the text messages?
Text message.
So their bill will remain at $357 then, is that what?
If you don't do anything, yeah, I mean, they paid, how many quarters, $357, I think we paid a couple of them.
It's the biggest decision of the
Well, definitely paid the first and the second, just like obviously the first and.
So,
Put that out there for, let's go right ahead.
anybody have, it sounds to me like you're leaning toward, it's too late, not too little, too late. Am I hearing that right?
That's the way I feel.
Okay, that's what I'm getting. So, there's ample opportunity, if there are extenuating circumstances, I think we've been very liberal with hearing these. There doesn't seem to be any compelling circumstance to make an exception in this case. So, Jeff, will you, with council's approval, will you make a notification that it really needs to be better? Please watch their P's and Q's. Okay, all right. Next is Jeff's favorite topic, and that's the best practices worksheet. And
It's especially my favorite this year, because they added 30-some questions. Some of them that are not law yet, but they want you to get a point, you have to be doing something in compliance with the law that's not in place yet. One of them is questionable whether even municipalities should be doing it. I won't go into all that, but you've all been given a copy of, and we've got a shorter time frame and more questions on it. And just for your information, I'm on the email chain with the New Jersey Managers Association, and it is buzzing on this. They're taking questions and comments and taking them back to the Division of Local Government Services, because no one's happy with what this is about. And I'll give you, for instance, is basically we don't know what these questions are going to be, and then at the end of the year, it's like, are you doing these best practices? Seems to me that if it was a best practice, you would send them out in the beginning of the year saying, we're going to expect you to do these, and then, question you at the end of the year, are you, how many of them are you doing? But it's almost looks like a game of gotcha right now. But we do have enough affirmative answers on this to qualify so that you get all of your aid based on the answers, the responses that are on the sheet. Where some that are questionable, I'm just putting no. We couldn't accomplish them in time to make the time frame, because that's the other issue. They have to be back by November 12th, is it? We only have one. We only have the public meeting before it's due. So what we would do is have a resolution on the public meeting to approve it and send it up to the state, unless anybody has any questions.
I don't think so. Okay. So at this point, we'll have our reports from the folks that are here. Let's start with you, Joe, so I don't forget. Anything from the RAC?
Yes, a couple things from the RAC. Thank you for starting right out on the meeting at 7:30. We have the Trunk or Treat coming up this Saturday. Everything's doing pretty well with it. It's all like almost 100 tickets for it. It's at the new community park. We're gonna have a rain date. It's supposed to rain Saturday and Sunday.
Of course.
So see what happens maybe the following weekend, Saturday, if everything goes well. The biggest thing is with the Winterfest coming up in December. Thank God Jake's place isn't filled yet, but we can still have it there. We're going to have it there. But it was brought up to maybe have it instead of Friday night, have it Saturday on the 8th. So it's going to bring the town council, as you guys thought. We had a meeting with the police department. They said it's no big deal. Either day is fine with them, but the reason we were going to have it on Saturday was we're thinking about getting a synthetic ice rink to try to have an event, make it more of a winter festival for the kids to come out and get to skate for a little bit, and then do the tree lighting, and then have them see Santa Claus. That's why if we did it on Friday, there's no time frame to have the 5-hour rental for the ice rink to participate. It would be all clustered. It would be too much of a jam then on Friday night. So
Yeah.
the thing about doing it.
Yeah, it's already been, there's no issues with it.
Sounds great.
So that's what we were thinking about doing, is moving it on Saturdays. That way we have more time to do the ice rink, then do the tree lighting, and then do the.
So it'll start like somewhere in the day, like late afternoon, and go
Yeah,
into the night?
probably around 4 or 5 o'clock.
Mhm.
And then that way we can go till 10 o'clock like we normally do.
Mhm.
And that way we can break things up. Even we can start earlier and then have the other events with the crafts and stuff like that. Because we have the turnout we did last year. We figured we're going to have, when people find out about the ice rink, it's probably going to bring even more people.
We'll be able to have music and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have DJ and stuff like that. The other thing is that we had talked to a few people and about the tree lighting. We have a community park, we light the tree, and the tree, nobody sees after that day. So what I wanted to know is if I could do some fundraising or get some money to, not from you guys, but find some money to have a tree put out front and have it lit, so that way it's lit, coming down Chester Avenue, it says the tree lit outside. They were talking about that would be a good idea. Because next year, we're gonna have to think about what we're gonna do. with
Planting a
it.
tree or to?
Planting a tree.
And that would be in addition to the one that's in the park.
Yeah, because the one in the park, by the time we get done, after Jake's place is built, we're either gonna have to shift it all the way over to that field, but then if they do the field, we're gonna be out. There's not gonna be any room.
Right.
So,
We have an area, Jeff?
An area for what, the tree or?
Planting a tree in the
no,
front.
Jake's place.
No, we have area, we just have to make sure we have electric out there.
I didn't think the tree is in the way of Jake's place, though.
No, it's on the way of Jake's.
It's not in the way of Jake's place at all.
But that's
What's
where all
happening-
the other activities.
That's all the
Oh,
activities
okay.
was. So once Jake's place is built there,
Right.
it's, from what the blueprint I saw, that they, last one that they gave me, because they asked me about doing some stuff for them, but, it's gonna not. we're not-
Yeah, that whole open area.
We're not gonna have that
That's
much
what you mean,
room.
okay.
You're talking 3,000 people. We had 2,400 last year. That was just the first event. So we do different events as we go and bring more people. There's not gonna be enough room to do it.
I think it'd be a nice idea to have a permanent inside the building.
I like it.
Even if we have to,
Yeah.
that sounds great. All right.
Well, we has a, has a
Yeah,
focal
it
point
can
on
be
the center
seen,
of
yeah.
town.
At least it
People
looks
see
like we're not
Right.
grinching.
Yeah, I know they have the other one inside here, but we can try to do something outside
That'd be
here.
great.
Do you still do the one inside? You
Yeah,
always do the
yeah,
one
they do the one inside.
Mhm.
But then what we're thinking is,
Oh, we didn't do it last year.
no,
No?
We did it the year before.
year
though.
before.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I remember it was the year before.
Yeah, we didn't do it last year.
Okay.
You know, we had a meeting with Jimmy Mitchell and, I forget the other.
John,
John Williams came in later, one of the detectives.
or Harry Cassidy.
Yeah, Harry. I get the two mixed up all the time. About, after this year, we have to think about how much room we're gonna have once they start building Jake's place over there. Same thing we're having with Delran Day, or Night Out, is moving it here back to the township between the school all the way across and the municipal building with the parking and shutting, let the loop around the building with all the parking in the back. So,
And closing Chester Avenue.
we'll close Chester Avenue from, the 2 streets and then have the whole event.
You know what would be ideal? If we were able to get Abrasive Valley cleaned up and have that whole area as a big park going onto the water and being able to utilize that
There's no
once.
parking there.
I agree, but, I mean, everybody can walk, you can walk, you could have buses go to it. But I'm just saying, eventually, it would be a nice area, it goes right out to the water, a beautiful type of area, if they're not doing anything over there.
They mentioned before they shut down.
Just, I'm talking.
Chester Avenue, Underwood Boulevard, and we got all the parking and then everybody can just move around.
Yeah,
Underwood
you do have a
Boulevard.
lot of parking altogether, that
Right.
would save some money.
And then with the events, you can have, events in the municipal building, the school, and then all the crossroads.
You know, like you can't have the bonfire, you
Well,
can have a bonfire.
that's where one thing we're talking about is places, and Jimmy and all were talking about, different locations for the bonfire. So, I mean, there's a field across the way here that we can have a bonfire, that's not really that.
So they would be for future consideration?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. I'm a little disappointed because I will be at an engagement in Buffalo that day, so.
For the cheerleading?
Yeah, Buffalo in December. It's where to be, it's a place to be.
You might have to get out.
So we just need, I just want the town council approval that we do move it from Friday night to Saturday because of some of the events we're trying to.
I don't have any objection, I think that's a great idea.
Is there anything else? I forget. Yeah, sure.
How you feeling?
I'm hanging in there. Still got a couple issues,
He
but
was in the hospital for a while.
I was 8 days in the hospital. It's Jamie's fault. We figured it out. Today we figured it out.
Thank you for everything that you do, so,
I
I
appreciate it.
appreciate it, Joe.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for doing it.
Jamie, anything tonight? Jeff, anything tonight?
Just 2 updates. We submitted with our stewards firm all of our updated policy manuals and personnel policy issues to stay in compliance with the joint insurance fund. That allows us to have lower co-pays and lower deductibles. We've been in compliance every year, but it's a little bit of an undertaking, and his office was very helpful. And the the other issue is on an annual basis, we have to update all of our insurance exposures. Everything's done online, and that went fairly well this year, so everything is done in that regard. And I already had one question about it from Jake's Place. Jake's Place equipment has already been updated, and in the package, they're covered. So that's pretty much it.
Okay. And from our attorney?
I believe the latest development was the submission of the updated background check ordinance in light of the most recent language that was requested by council. But I believe you guys hadn't had a chance to review that yet, so that'll be the next step. Either more feedback or potentially, hopefully, introduction.
Okay. Jim, what do you have for us? Anything?
No, so Winmore is supposed to be paved tomorrow, and Hartford Road is supposed to be paved next week. Even weather permitting. When they pave Hartford Road, the road's going to close on one side at a time. So traffic going one direction is going to be diverted around, and when they switch to the other side, in the opposite direction, it's going to be Borton's Landing Road and Westfield Road and Bridgeboro Road are detour.
Are we gonna have signs up like,
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive sign detour package.
so it'll
Cops,
be all well
police.
ahead of time? So people are gonna know
Yeah.
that that's the way that road's gonna be?
Yes, absolutely.
Because you're
Yeah,
gonna have
there's
Summerhill,
signs-
you're gonna have the
there's
Grand,
signs-
all them are.
There's signs in Morristown, there's signs on
Okay.
Bridgeboro, there's signs at Summerhill and the Grand. And it's one of the things we were working with the county on. We were very responsive to, the project and helping us get the detour plan up right. So just thank the county on that.
Yep.
Any idea how long it's gonna look?
It's only gonna take like a week.
Great.
It's about 2 days of milling and then 2 days of paving.
Correct.
And then the roof, they actually replaced it, they did the repairs on the skylight, and actually when they did that, when they took some of the stuff off, they actually found some things that were of concern and that they fixed it, so hopefully that issue leaks.
They tested it, they're testing it real well, and
Yeah, it's gonna be, yeah, good.
They start the punch list or redone?
Yeah, no, now that there was one thing that the general contractor had to wait till the skylight was done to do the flashing around the skylight, so they're coming back in to do that, then they're done.
so they're gonna test it real well after they do the flashing, I hope.
Yes.
Because the flashing
Right.
part I'm concerned about.
Yeah, yeah. Now they have the Garland, the architect,
Okay, I'm
and the
just-
contractor are pretty focused on making sure it's right.
Good. Anything else?
No, thank
Okay. So, we have one more of our professionals that are here, and for those folks who are wondering, why is our auditor here for a meeting? A couple meetings back at a public meeting, Mr. O'Lear had a question regarding some language in the audit, and he was concerned that we were, in desperate, dire straits. And as promised, I reached out to Bob, and I think a couple of people did, and I said, you know what, I understand what you're telling me. I couldn't explain it again, so I've asked him to come out and do that, just to explain, and I think you've had an opportunity, Bob, and I'm gonna ask you to come over here, because you look so good on video. So you've had a chance to review the videotape. You want to sit down or you want?
No, I'm fine.
So just
Sure.
frame the question again for us so that
So,
we know, and then the answer.
Yeah, the way the audio was a little bit difficult. I think the gentleman spoke a little bit late, but, first thing I'll just say is I think it's always good you have a member of the public ask questions sometimes, and what I am always cautious is of who asks the questions and what do they know. I'm sure the gentleman understood accounting very well, but there's a lot of differences when you're talking about governmental and fund accounting. So it could be boring for what I have to say, but just try to let it sink in just a little bit. So there were basically two questions that he raised. One was that the township received a qualified opinion, which at that time, it was being referred to as being, I think, shocked to find out that the report was qualified, and it's usually a last resort. So just to give a little bit of a background, you report on a regulatory basis of accounting, and that's required by the state of New Jersey. Most other governmental entities, your schools and authorities, report on a basis of generally accepted accounting principles. Okay, we call that GAAP. So there's going to be differences between what is GAAP and what is regulatory. And those differences, when they're significant, they need to be explained in the audit report. So because of that, we as auditors have to indicate whether your financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with GAAP. But that's not how we're reporting it on. So therefore, it's very odd, but we actually have to say that you have an adverse opinion, which is really bad because of all the material differences with GAAP. But that is just on paper. So when you look at your report filing on a regulatory basis, for the most part, every year, your report is presented fairly, and your financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with those requirements on a regulatory basis. Over the last couple of years, there's a technical accounting directive that's out there, and it talks about the general fixed asset account group. So these are items that do not appear on your financial statements. Whereas if you were reporting in accordance with GAAP, they would be. So that is the issue that we had when we were testing and auditing fixed assets. So we immediately brought it to the attention of the CFO and the manager, and we discussed it and said, you need to get an appraisal done. You need to have a company come out and reappraise your assets based on their formula, which is not a replacement value, but is either historical or estimated historical cost. And they use their guidelines when they do that. So your table here could have been valued at over 2,000. Then maybe when they go back and figure it out, they say, well, it's really 1,500, just to give you an example. There were always going to be differences. So council and management, I would say, acted responsibly to have that reappraisal done. My experience, when you have a reappraisal done, you're a good 2 years, sometimes even 3 years before you finally get it right. And why do I say that? It's because you're working off of a list that the township has that has been updated over and over and over again for many years based on an original estimate or an original historical cost. So because of that, there could be differences, there could be things moved. So what happens is the appraisal is done, we test it. Well, when we tested it in 16, it was not, we couldn't rely on it. So 2016, you had a qualified report with respect to general fixed assets account group. Again, it's an account group. So 17 happened, and you went through and you made more revisions. Somebody, several people from the township, I guess Jeff would be able to speak on that, looked at the list and tried to get it into a reasonable form to make sure that with the company that came out, in fact, they may even had to come out again, I believe. I think that's the case, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they came out again to refine their work. Again, very typical that I see when fixed assets are revalued or re-estimated. So this time we did a test again, and oddly enough, the sewer utility fixed assets were reasonable enough for us to rely on, but the still general fixed asset account group was not. So that's why you have this qualification in the report on fixed assets. So basically, I think it's good to know that sometimes, typically items that in the past were deemed fixed assets either have outlived their useful life of that asset or are being valued at a different amount that the appraisal deems to be an acceptable valuation process. There is no implication of any assets lost or misplaced. The township has a procedure in place to track their assets when they're being disposed of or being removed from their inventory. So it's basically, as I said, and that's what the finding had, and the finding even had what we call the condition, context, effect, and cause. So that it's just not, well, the fixed assets didn't agree. Well, we have to go into it a little bit deeper to find out why. So in that, is reflected in the finding, the township engaged an independent appraisal company to update the existing report of general fixed assets and the sewer utility fixed capital during the 2017 year. However, this report was not thoroughly compared or reviewed for changes that occurred during the year to the township's general fixed assets. So that means that, think about it, my responsibility as an auditor is to test, not to make sure that every single physical piece of equipment is here. That's the township's job, to make sure that every physical piece of equipment is here. So that's what we do, we test. And based on that test, we couldn't identify a couple items, so then we pulled a few more items. And then after a while, you just say stop. And that's kind of what happened, and then we qualified the report. So I would expect for the 2018 year that this would be resolved, because we're in the third year of this total estimation. But, as I indicated, these fixed assets are not even on your balance sheet of your current fund, of your financial statements. They're in a separate statement, and it's called an account group based on the terminology that the state of New Jersey has sent out, and those guidelines have been in effect for quite some time, basically in 1960.
Everybody get that?
I work with that in my
so-
department.
Yeah,
No, I get it.
so an authority is in accordance with GAAP. So therefore, you would have fixed assets on your balance sheet. Your utility, it's a municipally owned utility, so therefore, it's a separate section of the report, and you will see fixed assets on the balance sheet of the utility. But what happens is, there's an offsetting credit, and it's called a reserve for amortization. It's an old accounting term. And basically, those assets are accounted for in those two accounts, so that when there is an adjustment, it's only affecting those two accounts. And it really has no other effect. The problem was that the amount was large. So when you look at the restatement note, which is note 18 of the audit report, it was basically a $16 million adjustment. And you say, wow, that's a lot. And it is. There's no question, it's a lot. But it's to get it to agree to the independent appraisal that came out and said, okay, from a utility standpoint, here's really where all your assets are, and how they compared and looked at the buildings or the plants. They were all included because we had those looked at by, I believe, Jeff, as a matter of fact, right, Jeff? I think we had it given to you and or Linda, probably both, and had the township looked at it to make sure, is that report good or not? Because if it wasn't good, we weren't even going to look at it. And I think that's what happened in year one. The report was off and said, well, it's really not reliable. But in year two, when they came back out and refined their report, we had a little bit more credence to that report. So that's in essence what happened to, that's what happened as far as the restatement goes. Now, I just wanted to follow up because I think the second point was that there were significant issues with the restatement in the sewer fund and the effect on the township that it could have with banks and or rating agencies. So again, somebody from the public throwing that out, there's some cause for concern. So when you look at that, it really relates to the restatement of the sewer fund impacts, I told you already, the fixed capital and the reserve for amortization. I just explained why there was that restatement. So what, I just want to check my notes here. Okay. So therefore, I already told you we were satisfied this year. So because we are satisfied this year for 17 with the numbers, we have to restate the prior beginning balance. And that's what that was. If not, let's say that your assets were good at the beginning of the year and you got rid of $16 million assets. Let's say you sold something and it was $16 million, then there would not have been a restatement. It would have just been a decrease in assets. So we could have just showed it as a decrease and move on, but that wouldn't have been accurate. So it was really what we said was, if December 31st, 17 numbers were good, and we tested it, and we looked at what anything that was increased during the year, that means we have to go back and restate the prior balance. And that's why this is there. It's called an emphasis of matter paragraph in your report, or in my opinion, back to you. And basically it explains quite clearly why it was done. So I don't know if the gentleman looked at that part of the report, but it was clearly in there under the emphasis of matter why it was done. So in general, the two issues reflected in the audit, the qualified opinion and the restatement of sewer fixed assets, in my opinion, will have minimal financial impact, if any at all. Okay, so from it being something that we were told was pretty drastic, I don't think it will have any financial impact at all. You don't want a qualified report. That's granted. But when you look at it from a compliance standpoint, there are significant but not material to the overall financial condition. So you have to be able to comply with that technical accounting directive. So from a compliance standpoint, it's important to maintain that general fixed asset account group. Both the current and sewer utility fund maintain adequate, possibly above average fund balances, and both funds are meeting their debt service obligation. So from a financial standpoint, you're good. So these, although you don't want to have these issues, they need to be addressed, they need to be fixed, but they aren't going to impact you from a borrowing standpoint. So you look at banks and you look at rating agencies. What do the rating agencies look at? They look at fund balance. How does the township prepare their budgets? Do they have a forward budget? Do they look 3 years down the line? How are they utilizing surplus? Do you have a doctrine or a document that you follow saying we're only going to use this much surplus? These are what rating agencies look at. They look at your tax rate and see, are you using surplus just to not increase taxes, or are you building surplus and also looking at a tax rate that sometimes does go up but has keeps inflationary rate. Keep that in mind. They look at your long-term liabilities. They relate to compensated absences and pensions. The pension liability you hear about from the state all the time, well, you have a footnote in here about it, but you don't necessarily are addressing it from a financial standpoint, and that puts you along with all the other municipalities in the state of New Jersey. They're all not having these funds built up to eventually pay these liabilities. That's what the rating agencies look like, or look at. Rarely do we ever get a comment or a question about, we saw that you had to restate your fixed assets. Because your fixed assets are not being used for a basis of borrowing. Whereas in a general business, your fixed assets are your collateral. So when you go to the bank, you only borrow for two reasons. One is your capital improvements, and the second, in a rare instance, would be if your cash flow is low and your tax bills haven't gone out, it's something called a tax anticipation note. That's it. You don't borrow otherwise. So that's the only way you can borrow. So certainly want to minimize the fact that the fixed assets were an issue, but it's more from a compliance standpoint, not from a financial impact standpoint. So I wanted to make sure you were all aware of that.
Stay right here. So you can see why I didn't want to try to explain that to you. So let me just try to do this in English.
Yes.
All right.
Now I'll try to.
So our assets are buildings, equipment, sewer equipment, roads?
No,
No. Okay.
that would be infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
So you
Okay.
have land, you have buildings, you have equipment, you have automobiles, you have,
Well, we don't, the point I'm trying to get to is, we don't use them as collateral to borrow against.
You do not.
No, so what?
Businesses do, we don't.
Right, so the value of that really is on paper only, just for this.
The only other impact it could have is, Jeff was just saying that he just went through his insurance renewal. So you could be insuring assets or an asset value that really needed to be reduced.
Right.
So, it would be.
Except those are reviewed every year by every department head and then reviewed by us, so we know that those are fine.
You know it, okay.
The problem is that those don't have values addressed to them that change, because we tried to run those against, I mean, the biggest problem we had, quite honestly, is trying to make sense of the previous appraisal values. When we looked at the new one versus the old one, we can't figure, I mean, number one, I'm not an appraiser.
Right.
So I don't know, when you look at a pump station, you say, okay, this one was appraised at $800,000 and now it's appraised at $200,000. I'm just giving numbers out. We don't know why, but for the most part, the latest appraisal had lower values than the original appraisals did.
Right, but it has no impact really on anything from a borrowing perspective, just an
Number one, when we have a big project with sewer, we're going to borrow from NJEIT. I mean, that's not the out, but those are set, those rates are set, so that has no issue on it. If you look at, and we included in the PowerPoint that goes out every year with the budget, we include the latest statement from Moody's. Moody's it's glowing. The report on Delran Township is glowing, and it's because of the amount of surplus and fund balance that we've had in the past and how we've managed that fund balance. So all the reports, I've never seen anything, there's not really much of a negative in there, other than the one issue that Bob mentioned that every county in New Jersey has, and that's the pension issue.
Right. And just to add to what Jeff is saying, that when and if you were to issue bonds, you would have a prospectus that would go out, we call it an official statement, and it asks for 5 years worth of audits, okay? So it'll have, though, my most recent current audit report, which would reflect this. But in the appendix where all the financial statements are, there's never included a statement of fixed assets. It's only by fund. It's only by the current fund, the trust fund, capital fund, sewer fund. So even though my report would have it, your financials that the investing community would be looking at would see that, oh, they have a fixed asset issue, but, oh, it's a New Jersey municipality, so we know that they don't.
Just an added thing that you have to report, but yet it's not something that
Correct.
is
Because-
critical because it's a municipality.
And because it's a departure from GAAP, whereas GAAP would normally include those on your balance sheet.
So for those of us who are lay people and don't deal with this every day, what I heard, tell me if I'm right, is that looking at GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, that versus what we have to use, which is regulatory basis, that's why there was some confusion. That based on GAAP, that would be a problem, except that we don't do things based on GAAP because we're a municipality.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
So I appreciate the cause for concern, but I appreciate you clearing that up and explaining to us what the deal was and the impact on that is.
No, the only impact could be, and I think, did you ever pass a corrective action plan?
Yes.
You did,
Yeah.
okay. Because you got the same thing I got from the
It's been
state.
sent to the state.
Okay, is that the state follows up and the state looks at findings. So they see this as a repeat finding. So they want to make sure that you're following up on it. And it's, you're not sitting back, you're not doing anything.
Right.
You've gone through it, like I said, it will take a year or two for it to work its way through, but the state with anything would follow up or could follow up and say, how's it going? So again, at the 2018 audit report, there's the same problem. That could be an issue with the state, but.
We're fixing, we got the sewer in line.
Right, sewer in line, now the other component, which we call your general fixed asset account group, needs to make sure that that's in line.
This is your job and not mine.
But with the state, I'm just gonna go a little bit further,
Sure.
because I know with the authority it's a little bit different, and I like the cut or whatever, we get hit with a penalty, we also can get cut funds. With the municipality, the state really doesn't. If it
You
was
would be
just
the
mine-
first I ever heard of that
Exactly.
would have happened to.
Right.
There are a lot of reports that get issued with qualified because the auditor goes out, they can't figure out the assets, and either they're not getting support from the town or whatever, they just move on, and they qualify. Here, we painstakingly went through
That's good.
several reports, right,
Yeah,
Jeff? I mean,
that's
several times, back
Very
and forth.
detailed, that's great.
Yeah, so it wasn't like we don't move on if we can't find it, we make sure there's an answer there, because quite frankly, I don't like to issue a qualification, but, it is,
Because, just so that the people know, we typically we do this at the beginning. I know some of them, but you do these audits in a number of towns and have been for a number of years. You're the, I appreciate you taking the time to come out.
Oh, no problem.
I'm gonna, if anybody has a question for Bob,
Come on, accounting question,
Yeah.
come on.
Bob loves accounting questions.
I just say this, you made it very understandable for a guy that has trouble with his checkbook from time to time.
Okay,
so
well, thank you,
very much.
thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, sure, anytime, just give me a call. Okay?
Appreciate it.
All right.
We'll let Bob go. Okay, Bob, if you want to leave, you can leave.
I can't stay for the party?
You can stay. There's no party.
Take care, Jim.
And let me ask in advance, does anybody have questions for Jim? Because Jim has a pressing need to leave, unless you have a question in your report. It has nothing to do with the World Series. So unless somebody has a question. He has an extenuating circumstance, so why don't you go?
All right.
And thanks for the roads.
Take care of it.
Thanks for the roads.
Good night.
Okay,
Great.
so we'll go to reports from council. Dan, anything for us tonight?
Nothing tonight.
Nothing. Tyler, anything?
No report.
Easy
Thank
time. Virginia, anything? No report? Patty, anything?
I do, I
I
have just a
do.
quick, well, no, it's really
It's a
quick.
good one.
And can you pass those out to everybody? We had talked about, and I had got approval to have the Veterans Commemoration on Thursday, November 8th. I'm gonna kind of redo this, it's gonna be on flag paper, so it'll look, it'll look nice. But, I just wanted to let you know that I spoke to Bob Smythe, who is, very much willing to be our guest speaker. Todd Epperly from the, VFW post here in Delran was the man who suggested that. And Bob has come to every one of our celebrations here, and he's going to do it. And I told him this is not a political thing; it's just a speech about veterans. So he said that would be good. And then we're going to recognize our post here and our the VVA Chapter 899 because they come down to our schools all the time. And and a lot of the VDA members live in Delran or Riverside, this area. So I left a message with Tom Farrell from the 3020, and I thought he would come and accept like Gary we had said, maybe like have a proclamation like we do for the VDA, and Bill West will accept that, he's their president, and then Tom Farrell. And then afterwards, Jeff had checked out for me. There's enough room for 100 and some odd people in the back room there. We'll have a reception. I think I'm going to put reception on food and beverages following. I'm just going to, this was just a rough idea, but I just need to know if anyone has any suggestions. I thought we'd have the school choir, school sing again. I have a slideshow, maybe a reading, and then the meaning of Memorial Day. Bob Smythe will talk for 10 minutes. That's it, short and sweet. And then I'm gonna try to see, I have to talk to Joe, having, maybe some sandwiches, some baked ziti, salad, coffee, and then we'll get a couple of cakes that say, thank you veterans, red, white, and blue, and we'll set them up. And, I'm gonna go over to the Knights of Columbus and put some flyers up there for their members. And the VDA is having their meeting Saturday, and Todd Epperly said he'll put it out in the county for this area, and so will Bob Smythe. So I think we'll have hopefully a better turnout than the last time. We've had such really good turnouts, and then the last one was not very good, and then we didn't have it last year, so maybe this will kind of revive it a little bit, I think. And we'll see, we'll do the best we can. But does that sound okay? And yeah,
Sounds
great.
it's fine, all right, and would any of you, if you're planning on coming, would you like, wanna do a part in it? You know how sometimes we had people read or do things, or do you just, would that be, people be willing?
Why don't you put together what you need?
Our
people to do?
program?
I'm sure
Okay,
that
then
we'd
you'll
all
do it.
be willing to help.
Okay, okay, all right,
Great.
that sounds good,
Great,
all right,
thanks, Patty.
you're welcome, that's
So
all.
in my report, I just want to, just one thing, I just want to mention that Jackie Burton passed recently, that's Morris Burton's wife. Everybody knows Mr. Burton because the Performing Arts Center at Delran High School is named after him. He was a longtime school board member, and his wife passed just the other day. And I just thought it would be appropriate that we mention that as they're great citizens and have been with us for a long, long time. So that's my report. Ken, do you have any announcements for
I
us?
have nothing.
Okay. I'll ask for a motion to go into public.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries? Anything? Nothing? Nothing. Seeing no additional hands, I'll ask for a motion to come out of out of public.
Make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we're back. We have nothing else, right? We don't have anything to close. We didn't make any motions. We're good to go.
Great job tonight.
I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.